Hi, my name is Brent, and I work at a company called Expo, and I live in Vancouver, Canada. When a developer first gets started with React Native, a common question that comes up is Expo or React Native? What the developer really means to ask, but does not yet have the vocabulary to express, is should I use the Expo managed workflow? Let's take a look at the word managed to understand what this means. Heroku provides a fully managed platform for app deployment, which means that you write your application and they take care of hosting it and all the problems that come with that, such as SSL and certificate management, server maintenance, security patches, scaling, etc. In the context of React Native app development and Expo, the word managed takes on a slightly different meaning, but the spirit is the same. The complexity of some layers of the stack are handled for you. In the Expo managed workflow, you write your application in JavaScript or TypeScript, and we manage the native layer. This means that the developer does not write or directly modify any of the native code in their project unless they send a pull request to the Expo repository to change it for everyone. Upgrading between different React Native versions is easy when you're just writing JavaScript because you only need to take into account breaking changes to the JavaScript-facing APIs. The trade-off is that you can't add or change native code without leaving the managed workflow by ejecting. In addition to managing the native layer for you, we provide you with tools to easily share development builds of your project with the team. We help you to manage your app signing credentials. We build your binaries for distribution. We help you to upload those builds to the stores. We give you the tools that you need to update your apps over the air, to send push notifications, and to collaborate with your team across all these tasks. The moment you initialize a new project, you have a professional workflow for building, deploying, and updating your app. This is huge. It can save your team weeks of work and even more in maintenance over the lifetime of your app. But many developers need or just prefer to own and be responsible for the native code in their apps. Because of the way people tend to think about Expo or React Native, the tendency for developers in this category is to think that they can't use Expo. If this is you, it might come as a surprise to you to learn that we've made most of our tools and services actually work great for any React Native app, and not just for Expo managed apps. You can initialize a new unmanaged project, or bare React Native project as we call it, with Expo CLI or with Create React Native App. This will give you a project that's based off of the React Native CLI template with some additional configuration to set you up with many of the same tools as in managed apps. If you eject from the managed workflow at any time, we will create the native iOS and Android projects that Expo is managing for you. And in just a few minutes, you'll be ready to resume building your project from the same place that you left off. So we started off with the question, Expo or React Native? Then clarified that to, should I use the Expo managed workflow? Which is another way of saying, should I let Expo manage my app's native code for me? Even if the answer to this is no, or not for this app, or not anymore, you may still ask, should I use Snack for prototyping? Should I use Expo tools for React Native Web? Should I use the Expo SDK libraries in my app? Or should I use the Expo notification service for push notifications? You may also ask whether you should use the Expo Updates service for OTA updates, or coming soon, the build service for managing app credentials and creating builds. And then a little bit further out, but also coming, is the Expo Development Client package. So let's look at these tools and services and how they apply to your React Native app. At this point, everybody using React Native probably knows what Snack is, but in case you don't, it's like Code Sandbox for React Native apps. Open snack.expo.io in your browser, and you have an in-browser development environment to quickly experiment with ideas on the web and in an embedded iOS and Android simulator and emulator. You can also open Snacks on your phone in Expo Client or in a local simulator. You can drag and drop assets like images and fonts, and you can add libraries to package.json, as long as they're supported in the Expo managed workflow, that is. Hit the save button and you can share the URL to your snack with a friend. Press the code icon and you can embed it in your blog or in some documentation. We've also seen teams use Snack for previewing and interacting with components in their internal design systems. So, should you use Snack? Yeah, you probably should. When you initialize a React Native project with Expo CLI or Create React Native App, which is CRNA for short, it supports web out of the box by installing React Native Web, React DOM, and using the Expo Webpack config. This Webpack config is similar to React scripts from Create React App, but tailored specifically for React Native apps. It provides polyfills, aliases, and other defaults that make using iOS, Android, and web work in the same code base out of the box. If you need to extend it, you can inject the Webpack config and index.html and several other hidden configuration files by running expo customize web. When you're ready to ship your app, you can run expo build web, and we'll create an optimized bundle that can easily be deployed to a hosting provider of your choice. An example of a website out in the wild that uses these tools is React Native Directory. It uses an adapter we built to integrate nicely with Next.js. In addition to the Next.js adapter, we provide adapters to integrate with Gatsby, Electron, and Storybook, so you can use those tools for your web app and share components between platforms where it makes sense. Check out the examples of these integrations by running npx CRNA and choosing template from expo/examples, and then select the example that you'd like to try. The examples default to managed Expo projects, in part because it's a lot quicker to install and easier to maintain a lot of these examples when they're just packaged JSON files and JavaScript files. You can just run expo eject to create the native projects if you like. You can use the Expo HTML elements library to render semantic HTML elements on the web and fall back to native equivalents on iOS and Android. For example, H2 will render to an H2 tag on web and a text component on React Native for iOS and Android. Expo Match Media is a useful polyfill for the browser window.matchmedia API, so you can use React Responsive for cross-platform media queries. And of course, libraries in the Expo SDK work great on the web. The Expo SDK is an extended standard library for React Native. It is a set of libraries for iOS, Android, and web that are written in TypeScript using consistent API conventions. Like other React Native libraries, they expose operating system capabilities such as audio, video, camera, file system, permissions, calendar, contacts, media library, OpenGL, web browser, and so on. The libraries are all named with the Expo prefix rather than the React Native prefix, but they are React Native libraries. Now, it's worth noting that the Expo prefix was probably a mistake because it makes developers think that the libraries only work with Expo, which is commonly understood to just mean the Expo managed workflow. The intention on our end was to indicate that the libraries support the platforms that we support at Expo, iOS, Android, and web, but we can see how this is confusing. Another important thing to note is that the Expo SDK libraries are built on top of a module abstraction that we call unimodules. So you'll need to install the React Native unimodules library in your project before you use them. Alternatively, you can create your project with Create React Native App to have React Native unimodules installed and configured out of the box. React Native unimodules makes it possible for libraries within the Expo SDK to depend on native code from other libraries in the SDK. For example, Expo Camera will use Expo Permissions for requesting permissions and Expo File System for writing files. A common concern that developers have when they install React Native unimodules is that there are a lot of interface files. These define the interfaces that modules use to depend on each other. So Expo Camera requests a module that implements the permissions interface and then calls the permissions interface methods on that. You can exclude all of these interface files manually if you like. However, you will need to include those that are being used by modules in your app. However, it's not necessary to actually exclude them in most cases because they're just small header files and you don't really have to worry about them increasing the size of your app. Some libraries that I lean on extensively are web browser, auth session, camera, haptics, and file system. One of the most interesting libraries in the SDK is Expo, which powers TensorFlow.js for React Native and works with Three.js and React 3 Fiber, so you can build some really nice cross-platform 3D experiences like games and little 3D whimsical flourishes for your apps, like the cute spinning planet Earth in Shopify's Shop app, for example. Most libraries in the Expo SDK stand on their own, but Expo notifications and Expo updates have optional dependencies on backend services that you might want to lean on to make your life a bit easier. One caveat before we continue is that the features I describe as being currently available for these services are entirely free to use and will remain that way. But when I talk about what we're working on to improve these features, those improvements will be rolled into an upcoming paid service offering featuring the next generation of these services. Expo Notifications provides a cross-platform API to fetch push notification tokens and to present, schedule, receive, and respond to local and remote notifications. The Expo Notification Service abstracts over the platform-specific notification providers APNS and FCM and provides a simple HTTP endpoint to send push notifications to both platforms. To set up Expo Notifications in your project, enable the push notifications entitlement in your iOS project, and create and configure a Firebase app in your Android app. Now, if we want to use the Expo Notification Service instead of APNS or FCM directly, we need to upload our server credentials because the notifications service needs them in order to send push notifications on your behalf. The iOS side can be handled automatically if you run Expo Credentials Manager in your project directory and select Add New Push Notifications key. On the Android side, you'll need to copy the FCM API key from the Firebase console and add it to your project by selecting Update FCM API key in the Credentials Manager. In your app code, you can now call notifications.getExpoPushTokenAsync rather than notifications.getDevicePushTokenAsync to get your Expo push token. The method returns a token string that's formatted like Expo push token with square brackets and an ID. To send a notification to the device, you make a post request to the Expo push send endpoint with a JSON payload like to, title, body, and a variety of other potential fields. We recommend using one of the existing Expo Server SDK libraries to do this in production in order to help with batching, and it provides a nice typed interface in many cases. But an easy way to give this a try in just a few seconds without creating or configuring a project is to open up an Expo Notifications Snack demo in Expo Client. Once you accept the notification permissions, you can tap Press to Send Notification, and this will send a push notification post request directly from the app running in Snack. This temporarily only works on iOS and Snack, but it'll be resolved soon once we finish transitioning entirely from our legacy notifications API in the Expo Client. The notification service makes it super easy to get started with sending push notifications in your app. The next generation of the notification service will include a web notification dashboard, support for sending actual notifications for web apps as well. And so if these sorts of features are important to you, you might want to consider using another push service. That said, even if you don't use the service, Expo Notifications might still be the best React Native library for notifications, and it's certainly worth taking a look at next time you want to add local or remote notifications to a React Native app. Expo Updates fetches and manages code and asset updates to your app from a remote server. In other words, it's a library for over-the-air updates. If you initialize a new app with Create React Native App, it'll have Expo Updates already configured and ready to use. If you initialize a project with Expo CLI, it'll be configured appropriately for your Expo account as well, which just saves you a little bit of work. The most common way to use Expo updates is to host your app, JavaScript, and assets on the Expo update service. So when you run Expo Publish inside of your project, it will build your app, JavaScript bundles for iOS and Android, and upload those along with any of the assets imported from your code to S3, and then the updates will be served to your users through CloudFront. The update service lets you publish versions of your app to different release channels, so you can easily target specific binary releases and environments. For example, you can run expo publish -- release channel production to target a binary that points to the production channel. Binaries that point to other release channels will not receive these updates. You can also perform commonly useful release operations like rollbacks and promotions. You can configure update behavior like whether to wait before starting the app, to download an update, or to download in the background. We configured this app to wait up to 4 seconds to download a new bundle when the app opens, and if it doesn't succeed in that time, it transitions to downloading in the background. But in many cases, you probably want to load your updates in the background, or manually control the updates in your app code and provide some prompt when the update is available. You may want to opt out of using the update service if you work at a large company with strict hosting policies. In this case, you can run Expo export with the public URL flag, passing in a path to where you plan to host the update bundle. Then take the bundle and upload it to that location, of course. When hosting your own updates, you'll need to implement some sort of logic around release channels, rollbacks, promotions, and other things on your own. And so we recommend using the release channel, the update service if possible. The next generation of the update service will feature incremental rollouts and deep integration into the Expo web dashboard. Currently, when you publish a new release, it's available immediately to all users, but it's often preferable to roll out incrementally to limit the damage in case of a significant regression accidentally sneaking into the build. Web dashboard integration will give teams easy access to release history and provide an interface for controlling releases and rollouts, which should be really valuable because, as you can see, there's a lot of information that you need to take in. We're now getting to the part of this talk where I'll be letting you in on some projects that we're working on that aren't quite ready for public use yet, but I'm really excited about them, so I just wanted to share some information with you now. So, what if all you had to do to create app and Play Store builds for a brand new React Native app was run one single command? No manual configuration required. The command would take care of prompting you if any information is needed, acquiring the appropriate app signing credentials for you, and then kick off release builds on dedicated build machines and let you know when they're done. After you completed this process once, your colleagues could also run the same command and everything will just work for them too. This is how the build service for managed Expo apps has operated over the past few years, and now we're working on bringing the same experience to every React Native app. The idea is that it should just work out of the box for most React Native apps, and you can customize the build process if you have more specific needs. The build service will be deeply integrated into the web dashboard and with the update service, so you can see at a glance which binaries are live and which releases are associated with those, along with an update history, a timeline of activity in your feed, and a dashboard for managing credentials. We're also thinking about the problem of getting your builds to internal testers so they can run them on their devices. This is very easy to do in the managed workflow. You can just share a URL to your app, and a team member can open that URL in the Expo client to test it out. What if you could pass in one flag to the build command and get a URL that a team member can use to sideload your app through ad hoc or enterprise provisioning profiles on iOS, similar to something like Hockey App? What if you could build a version of your app with an Expo client like Shell so that you wouldn't even need to download a binary most of the time to test the new build of the app? The Expo Client app is like a web browser for apps built with the Expo runtime. And the Expo runtime is the React Native and Expo SDK native code that your JavaScript executes against. Every React Native app has a native runtime, so what if you could take your app's native runtime and build a web browser around it? What kind of workflows would that unlock for your team? One idea is to publish a preview build on each pull request. You can set this up easily in the managed workflow by using the Expo GitHub action and configuring it to publish and comment on the pull request with a URL and a QR code. The ability to do this makes mobile development feel much more like web development in really the best way, and it brings us closer to the develop, preview, ship workflow that Vercel has democratized on the web. Developers using the managed workflow love the Expo client and often avoid ejecting whenever possible in order to be able to keep using it. We've also heard from large companies in the React Native space that they've built their own web browser type app for internal usage. So we've been working on a development client library that you can install in your React Native app, and it will give you an Expo client-like experience built around your own native runtime. For apps that lean heavily on JavaScript and where the native runtime doesn't change often, this could be a great fit for your development process, both for fully testing builds of your app and for prototypes. If your app has significant business logic written natively and the native runtime changes often, it may be more useful for just sharing prototypes. Now, what if you could use custom native code in the managed workflow? If you wanted to use a library that wasn't included in the Expo runtime, you could add it to your package.json and then kick off a new development client build and distribute it internally. This would be a great option for lots of developers whose needs aren't currently met by the Expo managed workflow because they need to install a library to get the functionality they need for their app. They can stick to just writing JavaScript code and installing off-the-shelf libraries to expose native features where needed. This is something we're thinking about and working on the foundations to support, like the new build service and development client library, and we hope to be able to share more with you about this in the near future. At Expo, we provide developer tools and services that help you build, ship, and iterate on React Native apps, so you can focus on delivering value to your customers. If you use React Native in your app, we can help, and I hope I've given you some ideas for how you might use Expo tools or services in the future. So maybe instead of Expo or React Native, we'll start seeing a lot more Expo and React Native. I encourage you to check out what we have available today and follow along with some exciting updates in the coming months at blog.expo.io and on Twitter @Expo. Thank you.